Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about is something I've been harping on a lot about in class, but I think it's important, is seeing problems the long way. All right, because I know everyone's going to have that moment on your homework, on your quiz, your test, somewhere that with all these shortcuts you've learned, you're going to temporarily forget or make a mistake. Okay, like right now. I might look at this and think to myself, oh, crud, I know this is something like add or multiply, but it's just not coming to you at that moment. So I don't want you guys to forget that there is the long way of doing these things. And it doesn't even have to be written out on paper, but even in your head, visualizing what these problems look like the long way will make them easier. Okay, so again, in my head, what I'm seeing is x to the third times x to the fifth. And so when I look at that, I can see, well, it's just x times itself 8 times. And then I can go, oh, all right, yeah, this is the one where I want to add the exponents. Okay, I don't care whether or not you know the title of this property, but the fact that if you can visualize what it looks like the long way, it's going to make it a lot easier to understand and remember what the shortcut is. Okay, I have the same thing on problems like these. I see it all the time. N to the fourth to the second. People think to themselves, am I supposed to multiply? Is it 4 to the second power? Do I add them? And they just don't remember at that moment. Okay, but if you can think of it like this, n to the fourth, and 2 groups of n to the fourth, then you'll realize, oh, well, that's just n times itself 8 times. And so you'll look back here and go, oh, so I must be multiplying. And it makes sense because I see n to the fourth, 4 n's, and 2 groups identical, which gives us 2 groups of 4, which is 8. So don't discount the long way. A lot of times we avoid doing things the long way, but in a problem like this, or these two, it does make things a lot easier. Okay, so remember, this is always an option for doing your work. Okay, so the final thing I want to discuss about seeing problems the long way is that even though for the most part we've been trying to focus on the properties and the shortcuts, that actually in some problems, especially division, that seeing it the long way is actually superior and easier than the shortcuts. Okay, so I want to do this last example 2 different ways to kind of make that apparent. Okay, so for example, let's say I just stick to the shortcuts I know. Let's say I'm doing this problem. Okay, most people would look at this problem and think first, okay, division, which means I need to subtract the exponents. But because I've got a smaller exponent on top, that means it's 2 minus 4, I'm going to get a negative. In this case, -2. Then that means I have to flip it, which will make this 1 over n to the 2, and I get my answer. All right, now, if I were to do this the long way, not only could I avoid the negative, but I'd avoid the flipping step too. All right, and so even though I probably do this in my head, I'm going to write it out so you can see it. Writing this out the long way would be n times n. And then on the bottom, n to the fourth would be n times n times n times n. And just like we saw in the videos, and what we've learned in the past, if you have a fraction where factors are shared top and bottom, well, they can just be canceled out. So right away, I can get to the fact that, well, I've got 2 n's. They're both on the bottom, which means I just place them underneath 1. Same answer. Okay, but here, I had to make sure that I was familiar with subtraction and how to get a negative. I also had to understand that that negative meant to flip it. Whereas this is a little more intuitive. We've got n on the top, n on the bottom. These cancel. And so what's left over is just n to the second power on the bottom of my fraction. Okay, so sometimes not only is the long way a good backup for just double checking your work, but sometimes it's actually a better method than trying to remember the shortcuts. Okay, so again, one last thing to think about. But the main thing today is just work on that review, both the shortcuts and the mixed shortcuts, and understanding everything so that everyone will do well on the quiz. All right, good luck. Hopefully this all helps.